So I hope everybody is okay as always with recording. Okay. Everybody, welcome. Thanks so much as always for logging in with us. We've such great regular followers on this Rural Voices seminar series. And I suppose as always, we want to thank most especially the Department of Rural and Community Development here in Ireland, who are a part of this seminar series that we run through the Galway Rural Studies Centre. And this is actually our 12th rural seminar series. So we're actually delighted, I think means we're a year up and running. And it has been hugely successful. We've had a huge volume of people that are logging in and out on a regular basis. People from Ireland and people from all over the world. And one of those all over the world is with us today. So we are absolutely delighted to welcome Alice Martin-Prével. And Alice is actually a colleague of ours. She's a friend of ours. And she really is a wonderful colleague who has been involved in our ruralization project. And I think going back a few weeks ago, we presented some material from the ruralization project already. And Alice has played a key role in one of the big aspects of the ruralization project, this idea of access to land. And this is something I suppose we all grapple with. We grapple with hugely here in Ireland, as we do right across Europe. And some of the work that has been carried out in ruralization really has focused in on this aspect of ruralization. And Alice works for a fantastic organization, Terre de Liens, and hopefully she might even tell us a little bit about this French organization and the European Access to Land Network as well. And Alice has carried out some really interesting aspects of ruralization from the European handbook, inviting governments to imagine the different roles that can take on regarding access to land. But she's going to tell us all about them herself, and maybe something a little bit about herself as well, Alice. So Alice, you are more than welcome. We have been trying to get you on the podcast for a couple of months. So we really are delighted, because access to land is a key issue with a lot of us here in Ireland. So we really are delighted, Alice, to have you on board. And again, thanks to everybody for joining in today. So I'm going to hand it over to Alice, and hopefully we are able to share your screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll just start with a short introduction of myself, actually. Thank you. Thanks, Maura, for having me today on this Rural Voices series. It's a high honor. It's been a great collaboration with the University of Galway through the Ruralization Project. So I work for Terre de Liens, as Maura introduced. Terre de Liens, it's an organization that has been existing for 20 years now. It's actually our 20th anniversary this year. And we're a landowner organization. We have a land company in which citizens can invest. And this allows us to purchase farms that are going for sale. And these farms, we're renting them to organic young farmers to protect the land on the one hand, and then provide access on the other hand to this new generation of farmers that we desperately need in France and in Europe. And Terre de Liens is also one of the co-founding organizations of the Access to Land Network. So that's a 10-year-old network that gathers organizations like ours, like Terre de Liens, landowner organizations from a variety of countries in Europe, but also more largely organizations that are interested in working to secure land for agroecology, for sustainable projects. So this includes farmers groups like Economies in Romania, which is a 20,000 member organization of small farmers, and the Network for Conservation of Catalonia, which is more on the environmental spectrum side of things, working with farmers to improve their practices from an environmental point of view. So it's a very rich network, and instead of me trying to convey what we do, I wanted to share, for starters, a small video that we created for the 10-year anniversary of the Access to Land network. So let me just show you the voices of the network, the rich voices for kicking off this webinar today.
That's great, Alice. Good.
So let me know if the screen sharing is working and the sound, and otherwise we'll.
Screen sharing is working, yeah.
I'm from an organization called Agronauten, Czech Republic, representing Nadace Propuru,
Rural's Association,
Eco-Ruralis, Terre de Liens, France.
Flächensicherung und der Landgenossen, Kulturlandgenossenschaft, the Dynamic Land Trust in the UK, Terre en Vue in Belgium, Xarxa per la Conservació de la Natura, the Access to Land Network, Access to Land Network,
The Access to Land Network,
Access to Land Network.
Agriculture is a European affair. It is even a world affair. And if you have an idea and you try to do that in one country, especially in the actual situation of Europe, you should look what is happening elsewhere.
right?
The Access to Land Network is a network of grassroots organizations across Europe who support and promote access to land for agroecological farming and generation renewal.
The network came up very naturally when we first started having exchanges between grassroots organizations working on land, working on how to preserve land for agroecology, for making land accessible to a new generation of farmers.
Even if the initiatives are different, they have one thing together. They want to make land a common good, and they want to install agroecology on a human scale and community connected.
There are many networks around that focus on advocating for the rights of farmers or for advocating for better land stewardship, more fair, more environmentally just and socially just. And that is happening in the Access to Land network and much more, because it's really a practitioner network.
Para nosotros es importante formar parte de Access to Land Network porque nosotros a través de esta red con más de 185 asociaciones en Cataluña que forman parte de ellas, parte de estas entidades celebran acuerdos de custodia para poder gestionar espacios agrarios y poder mejorar la biodiversidad de estos espacios y hacer compatible la actividad agrícola con la conservación de la biodiversidad.
Sometimes when you're dealing with an issue which is marginal in your region or in your state, you feel like you're an idiot. You're doing it on your own, which is the original meaning of the word. But when you get to the group of people who is dealing with the same issue, with the same enthusiasm, it charges you with the energy that you don't get at home, and you can bring this energy at home and infect other people.
We think it's also a systemic problem that we have to resolve, and we will be stronger with other member states also, and we have to advocate at a European level. You know, there's a saying that we go faster alone, but we go farther together. So I think exchanging practices and ideas with others and trying to link different projects together makes the whole movement and the whole transition go further.
It enables us to learn a lot from the other partners and the other European countries and bring this knowledge and practices into our country.
It strengthened my whole picture about access to land. It broadened my perspectives around land and the different ways in different countries.
So you find yourself in a very creative space where you can leave behind the conventionalities of our contemporary limitations, and you can dream together with others of how to create and facilitate access to land based on the idea of the commons.
We were gaining the experiences and skills and ideas of those who went the journey before us.
Land is key to making sure that countryside
remains lively territories in Europe, that we don't just give up on the idea that farming is a profession for the future and not just a profession of the past, and that we can have generations of Europeans dreaming of becoming farmers and being unable to do so. So that's my best hope for the network.
That was great, Alice. I'll let you take it down on your side.
Absolutely. Thanks.
I love some of the quotes there near the end, even dreaming of becoming farmers and unable to do so, you know, a real element of access to land, you know. Very good.
Absolutely. I'm always very emotional when I watch and show this video, because these are really the faces of the people who are making, working on the ground and making the change and working with the farmers. And that's the beauty, the richness of the Access to Land network. And a few various members of the network have been involved in the realization project for the past 4 years now. And one of the latest strands of work that we're developing through the realization project, but also more largely in the network, is how do we expand our impact by collaborating with new allies, which are local governments. We receive a lot of demands from local governments in our areas, in our regions, to advise them on their land policy, advise them on how to bring new farmers on the land. And so it's been important for us to take stock of what we already do with local governments and try to propose new material resources for these local governments to go further. So that's what I want to present today, is how it's our new handbook on how to make farmland work for public good, which is directed at local authorities. And when I say that, I say it with modesty. We're not trying to be normative about what one has to do. We're just trying to create a resource based on our practitioner observation of what we see can be the role of local authorities locally for improving access to farmland, and to provide resources for practice, really. So I'm delighted to present this work today, but before I get into this, it's important, I think, to complete the picture of the environment that we are working in, which is actually a pretty adverse environment. If you look at the rates of land concentration in Europe, they're really high, with 3% of the biggest farms over 100 hectares, who own over half of the land in Europe, or control, not own, but control through lease or ownership over half of the land. While 75% of the smallest farms, the farms under 10 hectares, only control 11% of the farmland. So the concentration is worrying. We also have figures on land degradation, which are worrying. The figures I have already date back from 2010, showing that we have nearly half of the EU soils that are suffering severe to modest nutrient loss and nutrient deficit. And in addition to that, of course, you have the issue of erosion, salinization, acidification of soils. So this increases the pressure on fertile lands that remain available, which are often in the hands of smaller farmers still. And then we have the issue of rising prices. I was trying to look up the facts on Ireland before I was logging in here. The latest Chagas report on the issue showed about 6% of rise of prices of farmland in Ireland last year. Last week I was in Belgium, where the average price of farmland is around 30 to 40,000 per hectare. But in Brussels, where I was, the land around Brussels is 100,000 euros per hectare. So prohibitive prices really for new generations who would want to get started into farming. And of course, there are other threats to be added, including the fact that the land markets are highly untransparent, and the players with the most social connection and financial capital are the most likely to get access to the land. So we've also reached a generational turning point. Over half of the farmers in the EU are over 55 years old. We also have these graphs, which are actually seldom shared. I didn't make them. It's a PowerPoint from the European Commission, but that show that actually older farmers own on average the smallest farms. And so when these farmers are going to retire, we have a great risk that the small farms are going to disappear, are going to be concentrated with larger farms. And in the meantime, access to land remains the #1 barrier for new entrants because of all the issues that we mentioned prior. And local authorities, really, they're the witnesses of this changing environment around them. The farms disappearing, the changing land structure, the changing food habits and practices of citizens, the degrading ecosystems, the water pollution costs that they're facing. So really, they're firsthand, they're exposed firsthand to these changes, and they're willing to act. They're also pushed to act both by their citizens, who are reclaiming local food, healthy food, that there is no chemicals sprayed on the farmland just around their houses. So there is this force for transition. There is also demands from national government. If I take the example of France, we have national targets of achieving no net land take for urbanization by 2050. So the government decides that, but then the local authorities have to implement it. There's also, in the UK, for instance, some carbon emission reduction targets that are set at national level. So the local authorities are caught between these different pressures and are really driving the effort locally. And what we argue through the handbook that we just published is that land is not a problem to deal with. It's actually a catalyzer for local development, if you look at it. So land is where you can create more jobs from land-based businesses. It's where you can recreate connections between citizens and nature. We have seen it with the COVID and now the Ukraine crisis is really the place where local agriculture, the territories can build resilience in times of crisis. So land is a catalyzer for an ecological and sustainable transition. And of course, the levers that the local authorities have to act on land will depend on the regulatory framework and on different the situation in different countries. But the message that we want to give with this handbook is that you can have, it's perfect if you have a holistic, sustainable agricultural strategy as a local government, etc. But you can also just start somewhere. And even making a connection with a community group working on land issues is a form of action. So really what's most important is to just start somewhere. So here is just a landing page of this resource that we created. Just to show you what it looks like. It proposes to get inspiration with some case studies, to get some tools on how to act, and also it gathers some practical resources and bibliographical resources at the end. But we'll dive more into the content. On the how to act, We distinguish three roles of local authorities: acting as a landowner, as a facilitator, and as a regulator. As a landowner, it means when the local authority itself owns land, which is often the case in a variety of countries. There is municipal land or county farms or these kinds of local assets. It's the responsibility to use those responsibly and to review the leases that there is on this land and to start gearing it to sustainable forms of farming. Acting as a facilitator is the idea that local authorities are actually well-placed and legitimate to gather stakeholders and organize local dialogue on these issues. And acting as a regulator, of course, the question of land use planning comes up, but also is the idea of using other regulatory tools available locally to create coherent land policies at the territorial level. Regarding acting as an owner, the trends that we see in Europe right now are to disinvest from farmland heavily. If I take the example of the UK, over the past 40 years, there has been a trend of selling off county farm assets. So 80,000 hectares of county farms have been sold off in the past 40 years. So that's about half of the county farms in the UK. So 80,000 hectares remain, and we need to preserve those now. So now we need to change the paradigm, and we need to go back to the idea that land is a worthy object of investment for local governments. And there are various ways that we explore in the handbook to do that. We have shown examples of local authorities who co-acquire farmland with some of our organizations, sometimes with charitable landowners. So it can be possible that the local authority, for instance, purchases the land and the other organization purchases the building, or vice versa. There are various ways that we explain in the handbook. We also have examples of local authorities who are working with the local land agency to temporarily purchase the farms that are going for sale, and then seed back these farms to new generations. But it's the idea that while the new farmer is getting ready with their business plan, with getting the loans from the bank, etc., the local authority can actually bankroll for some time the carrying of this land by the land agency before seeding it back to the farmer. And then, of course, there is the idea that we should make the public farms that exist viable to new generations. So invest in the infrastructure that they need for them to be up and running. And of course, this investment should be based on a coherent on strategy. Why do you invest in farmland? So this should be data-based, concerted strategies. We provide examples like the Cornwall County Farm Strategy in the handbook. And this strategy actually involves working with tenant farmers to change also a little bit agricultural practices on county farms. So introducing crop rotation, soil management techniques, etc. So public landowners trying to really work on orienting the use that's being made of public land. And that should be grounded in the realities of what it is to be a landlord and to have tenant farmers, and what are the realities of the tenant farmers. And often that's where we see a gap, because being a landowner is a function that's disinvested, as I said. It's an abandoned area of policy often. And we forget that we need responsiveness. If a farmer has a leaky roof, we cannot wait until the next municipal council to decide whether we will fix the roof, and the damage on the farm equipment still happens in the meantime. So we need this responsiveness, and because it's a tall task to get the proper tools or to be a good landlord, it's important to share with charitable organizations, with other municipalities, with private landowners on how to do this work of being an ethical, responsible landowner. Just a quick screenshot of some of the tools that we propose in the handbook regarding acting as an owner. We have tables with the questions you might want to consider if you're doing a strategy on how to manage your public land. We have tables like these ones that you can see on the slide on the principles that you might want to consider when leasing. So the importance of the security of the lease, viability, whether or not you might want to introduce some conditionality on the lease. And this question that I was just introducing of the relationship, managing the relationship with the tenant. That's it. There are other little tools, little tips, for instance, how to communicate about your public farms and also value the work that you're doing as a public landowner, for instance. So going on to acting as a facilitator, as I introduced in the beginning, the question of access to information on land is a very much a question of access to power and who can purchase the farmland. I was in a seminar last week in Brussels where we introduced this handbook to, there were 60 attendants, including quite a few local authorities, and our Romanian partners were explaining to us that in Romania, there is no database cadastre right now. So the local authorities hold the maps and all the information on who owns the land and where. So there, of course, they hold a key role in providing the data. But also in general, in Europe, there is a lack of data on land. I think we have a better idea of how many cows we have in the EU than actually how many people own the land. So we need, before, there is no large EU land observatory, so we need to create local land observatories. We need to survey our territories and know where are our farms. And one of the ways that Terre de Liens does that with local authorities, my organization, sometimes what we do is that we put on the boots us together with our volunteers and the elected officials, and we go and we do participative land mapping sessions on the territory. And it's incredible because we see the elected official enter into a dialogue with the farmers, ask them what they want to do with the land after they retire, etc. So generating and providing data, and then using that to facilitate a local dialogue on land to if you are going to tackle this issue of land, of course you are going to enter in conflict with those who hold the information, with the corporate interests also that are at play in agriculture. So broadening the circle, the community of the people who are interested in this issue is also a way to rebalance the power. And raising awareness of the people so that they become interested in this issue is, we argue, a role that local authorities can play. So last week in this seminar, we had, for instance, the municipality of Mouansartou in France. They have a municipal farm that they use to provide fresh food to their local school. But on top of that, they have created a very comprehensive education program around this municipal farm. So they bring the school kids to the farm 1 week per year with the teachers to learn about growing food, where the food comes from, the cycles, soil, the nutrients, etc. So it's a very, very important effort. And they also organize cooking classes with families, and they also educate other local authorities. Since this municipal farm has been working, they have welcomed over 250 local authorities from France and Europe to visit it, to see how it works to provide the fresh vegetables from this farm to the school, the infrastructure that they have had to invest in on the farm to make this work. So it was really good to hear this experience last week, and it's a really key area of work for local authorities. And finally, the role of intermediating, acting as a mediator between retiring farmers and new entrants or private owners and young farmers is an important area of work. This can take the shape, for instance, of organizing cafes, annual forums, land fairs. In the case of Ireland, you have the registered farm partnership that has been created by Chagas, and we, for instance, local governments could play a role in communicating about these schemes to promote the association of older and newer generations on the farm, or local subsidies for internship mentoring program between retiring farmers and successors are things that we've observed across Europe. So here it is for the facilitator role. As a regulator now, of course, the land use planning in a lot of countries is part of the prerogatives of local governments. And there we really argue that there is a need to shift the perspective on planning, that farmland is not the next empty area to build on, but instead you need to integrate farmland into your planning as an asset, for instance, as an asset to manage risk. If your area is prone to flooding, farmland is very important to preserve to increase the sponge effect of the city with the open soil. Farmland is, of course, an asset to keep clean air in the city, for the mental health and well-being of the citizen, and of course to provide food. So last week we had a session on agroecological urbanism, we called it, and it was really interesting to hear the visionary ways in which the cities have intended in some areas to reconnect the urban citizens with the nature around them. And then there is the question of what exists in the legal framework, the national legal framework, that can allow local authorities to intervene in the land markets. So in France, for instance, we have the possibility for local authorities to intervene by designating a perimeter that needs restructuring. So these are areas where the farms are very fragmented, the infrastructure, the roads to get to the farms are getting old, etc. Well, the local authorities working with the department and the regional level can designate a perimeter and incentivize exchanges of plots between farmers in this perimeter, reinvest in the infrastructure. So that's a very concrete way to intervene in the land market. There's also indirect intervention, and that's the catalyzed part. And that's more about putting the euros where your policy goals are. So it's the soft power of local authorities, but it's how they can, for instance, have the possibility to tax land development, urban development, to better fund the areas that are protected, that are rendering ecological ecosystem services, or how they can just support with the local policy, creating infrastructure to favor for short supply chains. For instance, you definitely need sometimes storage areas or transformation labs for the food to actually get it to the consumer. So it's helping agriculture deliver public good. That's what catalyzing is. And finally, a maybe more controversial stance, but one that we wanted to make, is that local authorities also have a role in advocating for changing the frameworks that determine in part their action. And we had the example last week of Grenoble, which is a city that has had a comprehensive land policy for some years. Well, they went on and advocated at national level, based on the realities that they had locally, that they needed a new planning tools. And now we have a planning tool called peri-urban protected perimeter for agricultural land, that's been instituted in the legislation in France, which allows bigger cities to protect areas of farmland and to tie very specific agricultural development objectives to this land. So advocating based on experience, based on the pioneering action that you're doing locally and the obstacles that you see to upscale this action is an important area to invest for local authorities. Just again, this to make you want to visit the handbook, but just a snippet again of what the tools that it includes there. So listing how agriculture can help with territorial risk management. So managing flooding, droughts, risk of fires, which are very important in some areas in the south of France or Spain. Reinvesting, like recreating areas of pastoralism around the cities to managing wildfire prevention is actually a pioneering action that we are presenting in this handbook as well. To conclude, I really have a lot of admiration and for the local authorities that we've interviewed to create this handbook, for the ones that we work with every day, because acting on land is something that requires political courage, because you're touching on the issue of private property, and it's not a popular issue in a lot of countries, and it takes some motivation for sure. And when you do this work, it's very important to give yourself time to experiment, to fail, and to see the results in the long term. So that's really one of the conclusions that we do and that we have. And that it is possible to make changes with low means, even if you just give put land on the agenda of your next municipal meeting. That's already a way to act. So to conclude, we think that land needs to be looked at as an object that is systemic, that can answer a lot of the issues that local authorities are facing locally, and that can create a more regenerative, more prosperous economy locally. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Alice, thank you very much. That was so informative. I suppose we had been involved in the ruralization project, but not as much involved in the work package that was designing the book that Alice has come up with. So for us, it's so interesting as well. I'm looking already at the chat, and we've already got little bits and pieces that people are interested in. So usually what we do is we ask questions within the chat, but I think even we might have enough time to actually ask people to pop in a few questions, or else maybe come on board and open your mic and actually talk for a question if they want. I think a good few people, apologies, I'm having trouble with my video, so apologies. So I think if there's anybody who wants to come in at this stage and actually ask Alice a question, I think that might be a good idea, or else pop it into the chat, and myself and Louise, who is with me as always, we can field some of the questions. But if anybody wants to come in, I suppose just to kick it off, Alice, I suppose, oh yes, great, Deirdre, I let Deirdre in first.
Hi, no, I was just, well done, Alice, that was great, very, very interesting. I just wondered whether there's information in the handbook about how to contact representatives in each country.
No, actually, there is no information. Last week we had a discussion about that, because we feel that Access to Land Network is present in a few countries, but not everywhere does it have such a network of local authorities. In Terre de Liens, we already have more than hundreds of local authorities that we are working with. So one of the ways that we discussed to do that is to engage with national networks. So last week we had the National Association of Italian Municipalities that was present, We also co-organized part of the event with the international, it's called ICLEI, International Network of Local Governments for Sustainability. So I think these umbrella organizations are really interesting entries to start contacting local authorities, and they're already thinking about resources for their members. They already know what their members' issues are. So that's one of the ways that we discussed to do this. And then the other very practical way is to just go knock on your mayor's door.
So is it kind of the access point is the local authority? Is that the intention? You know, it's sort of your target really is getting local authorities first and foremost on board rather than the community end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on the approach. It's a strand of work that has developed very organically for us because we've been asked by local authorities to help them with their local food or agriculture vision or plans. So it's generally come this way, but sometimes we also work with collectives of citizens, and we see that, you know, their initiative is great, but it needs a bit more political support. So that's where we go and connect them with the local authority if we can.
Okay.
But I do think, I mean, it doesn't. It's if you can do both, if you can work with your national representative, your citizens, and, you know, the mid-level is where definitely you can have the more impact. But we do argue that this is a very important link in the making policy.
Yeah, Brian, colleague of ours from the past.
Hold on. Am I in the room?
Yes, Brian, you're here. Thanks, Brian.
Deirdre, actually, I might comment on Deirdre's question there, because I know, Alice, I suppose I have worked in local authority in the context of Ireland, and I suppose, and Maura, you might chime in if I'm misleading Deirdre in this, but I think one way, Deirdre, would be to get involved with a local community group, and then bring in your local county councillors in order to put together, maybe, like, if you identify some county council owned lands in a particular town or area, it would probably work best if you could bring a proposal to them, ideally around one of the funds they have for something like community gardens or whatever you would be thinking about. I know, Alice, you mentioned knocking on the mayor's door. It's a kind of a, you know, slightly different context, but the same idea. So I think maybe, Deirdre, just if that helps. And then Alice, I apologize, I came in a bit late. So you mentioned regenerative agriculture as one of the things that maybe is practiced. Is that kind of something that's widely practiced in the context that you're presenting, or is it still a new idea?
Do you mean by local authorities or by?
Either or is fine.
Well, so if you missed the beginning, the Terre de Liens and the Access to Land Network were already organizations that are practicing with purchasing land and supporting purchasing land to support sustainable projects. So definitely that's our entry point. I wouldn't say it's widely practiced. I think what we see, and it's a little bit the bias that we have, and sometimes I see us researchers in the Realization Project and others, we tend to look at the pioneering or the good practices or the good cases, and to forget that this is definitely not the bigger picture in terms of land policy. So that's why I was reminding the figures around trends, around sell-off of public land, etc. So we need to achieve this balance between showcasing the good practices and definitely linking the authorities that want to do this work around pioneering examples, and then keeping in mind the bigger picture. And this is something that we now want to try to develop more in Terre de Liens in France, the organization that I work for. Oftentimes they come and get us because they want to have an exemplary public farm, for instance. So they come and get us because they say, can you help us organize the call for tender to find new farmers for this farm, etc. And we say yes, but we would like to think more largely with you on what's your strategy at the territorial level. So that's, we try to get the entry that we have and then bring them to a more global thinking on how they want to go beyond this pioneering project that they're interested in doing.
Sure. Thank you, Alice.
Sure.
Can I just raise a question from the chat? Or Geraldine, would you like to come in? Geraldine has just noted, have we contacted Galway County Council or have they participated?
No, I don't think we had made contact with Galway County Council as of yet via this report, but the idea here in Ireland is now, I think Alice has only just kind of produced the report in the recent few days, week or so. So definitely our idea at this stage via the ruralisation project would be that we would connect the report and the actual document itself directly to not just Galway County Councils, but across the county councils. And I think hopefully we will be able to do that as well via the, I suppose the departments as well. And we may actually use our collaboration via the Rural Voices Seminar Series via the Department of Rural and Community Development to hopefully disseminate the document to the departments via them. So hopefully, I'm not sure if we have somebody, I know the usual person we have on from the department is not with us today, she's on holidays, but we will definitely, if there is somebody else on, the dissemination of the document, definitely we would really hope to disseminate it across all of the county council levels.
Could I
just wants to jump
intervene here a little bit?
Again?
Absolutely. Can I come back in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please do.
Thank you. I was just going to say that it might be of interest that the Heritage Council have already, they fund heritage officers, but also more recently biodiversity officers in each local authority. And they have established a collaboration with the county and city managers to create sort of, if you like, a service level agreement between those. So if it was on their radar, it would be really easy for them to share it through their heritage officer and biodiversity officer network. And it's right on message for them. So yeah.
Yeah, a good idea as well, Deirdre. Yeah, absolutely. Alice, I suppose I was just wondering, as you were talking, like we have a very huge housing situation here in Ireland where we have a real lack of housing. Do you think that is in competition constantly with land, particularly land that's owned via the local authorities?
Oh, absolutely. We had the testimony last week of the city of Ghent in Flanders, and a big issue that they have is not literally the city that owns the land, it's the social welfare center. So the city is linked, they're both public entities and they're linked together, but the city doesn't directly make the decision for what's done with the land. And so the city has pressured the social welfare center to put a moratorium on land sales for now, but the social welfare center, their mission is to make social housing. For the food aid, they don't want to hear about farmers. They're getting the food for free from the supermarkets. So they just want to sell the land, do social housing on the land, get the money to do other social missions. And for the city, it's really hard to slow down that trend, actually. And they do have important needs there. So it's definitely a question, and we argue that if you're going to sell it, maybe that there are ways to do it in ways that are ethical, or to think about your urban development too, with the social housing that you want to build, etc., with integrating some agriculture into that. So it's a difficult issue because we don't only want small urban farms, etc. We do want agriculture to nourish the world, and we have to be aware. Cities tend to think of themselves sometimes as growing in an empty space, but then when you look at the food area that's necessary to feed them, very quickly that food basin is not, like, it runs into another city. There's not enough land. So we do have to really think about urban regeneration policies as a complementary issue to preserving farmland, redensifying, and that's often very costly, rebuilding, investing the industrial zones that have been left, so brownfield development and these kinds of things are very much part of the conversation, indeed.
Daniel, point.
Yeah,
Sorry, Louise.
I was just going to say the same thing. This thread through the chat, which is really interesting between Dermot, or Deirdre, and Daniel. Daniel, do you want to jump in? Oh, microphone not working.
If I may, housing for farmers sometimes is also an issue. So that's where it's very important to value whatever buildings or assets you may have as a local authorities, like to also give housing options to the farmers themselves. And I know,
sorry, the theme that's kind of coming up as, or the question that might emanate from the last two comments is, do you see differences across countries? For example, Ireland is, the housing is a major issue. Is that the same across in other countries? And then Deirdre mentioned about, culture and well-being is becoming a bit more on the agenda. And I think that links to where you divided up the local authorities to owner, regulator and facilitator. It's interesting to see how do people respond to that across the different countries. Are they open to it?
Can you just repeat what?
The first one was, did you see differences across the countries in the different problems, particularly Ireland? Of course, housing is the major issue. Was there other prominent ones, or is there similarities?
Well, just the regarding this, I mean, of course, the countries that have little space with, I mean, I see Belgium, Netherlands as, number one in those issues. The question of housing and like how much it encroaches on farmland is even more present than in France. I can't say more than that. I think it's an issue that all countries are grappling with, but on a different scale, depending on what's the size, the area of your country. I just want to say, though, that one of the countries that has the most pioneering policies regarding farmland protection and the most rigid ones is Switzerland. And part of that is their reduced area and the fact that they had this neutral position during the war, so that they had this consciousness really early on about their need for food sovereignty and local resilience. So it's really interesting to go look at this country in terms of how they've handled urban development, which they have a need for, of course, housing, but preserved farmland at the same time. And sorry, the second question, Louise, if you can.
Yeah, we could jump to a different theme if you want, Alice. There's a question here. It's kind of linked to well-being as well, as about cycleways to land. And do we know that many farmers across Europe opt for that, or is it kept more for food production?
Yeah, so that's often something that we see. We try to warn local authorities against. We see that there's often local will to have this very multi-service farms. Well, we'll do an education program and a social farming, like bring unemployed people to the farm to work on the land, and a social farming program. And often farmers are a little bit overwhelmed by these set of criterias that they see in like public calls for tender, and they don't see the place for food in all of it. So good practices that we've looked at exist where local authorities have left, the food production to the farmer and have contracted or self-organized the other areas, or contracted out to other collectives the idea of having an education program coming on the farm, like educational visits. So that's a way of looking at it. You can have various satellite collectives around the farm and leave the production to the farmer. The question of like this access to farmland for well-being urban citizens, what you have to be aware of too is that you might have to manage some use conflicts if people are coming to walk their pets and their farm animals, you don't want unleashed dogs to run after your hens. So, or there is issues on very urban farms of vandalism. If it's easily accessible, people can come and get the crops or trash the place, etc. So local authorities, if they do want to promote this access for well-being, they also have to be ready to do some prevention of this use conflicts. And that means, you know, putting signage, helping put fences, or having, you know, some people who are there to help on the big days, like the weekends, for security or these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Rangers, urban rangers, really.
Yeah, we actually had a big issue of that here this week, where a Wicklow farmer, you know, stopped trail walking because of that very issue in relation to dogs that had come on his land. So it is actually a real issue here in Ireland. Alice, what I was wondering as well, Louise, unless there's any other questions coming in, but I was just wondering, Alice, I suppose here in Ireland, there's such a, as in most countries in Europe, there's such an attachment to the land and buying land, owning land. Our tradition here in Ireland is that land is handed down generally from, you know, father to son, rarely father to daughter, but maybe increasingly so. And but it usually is a family farm that's being handed down. And I suppose the system within the access to land group that you have, you know, this idea of maybe purchasing land, then the idea of potentially a younger farmer taking maybe ownership or leasing of this land. Would it be leasing or ownership? And how does that play out? How do they compete for that possibility of getting that land? I'm just thinking about here in Ireland. I could imagine your door would be beaten down for the land. So I'm just wondering how that would work.
Yeah, I know the Irish situation is it's a different one, and we had contacts in the past with an initiative called it was called the Irish Regenerative Land Trust or something like that. I don't want, but anyway, it was the attempt of doing the same thing, and they were running into a lot more issues than we can be in France. But basically what I want to say on this is, first, we generally, when we go and buy a farm, there's already a project associated. There's already a young farmer who's like put in an application. We buy the farm for somebody. So it's not like local governments who would have a municipal farm and put out a call for tender. When we do engage, is that we know that there is a strong tenant behind it. Then we do lease the land, and that's a problem for some of the farmers, because the idea of Terre de Liens is we buy it with citizen money and we want it to stay a public good or a common good. So we won't sell back the land to the farmer at any point. And so that, you know, for some of them is an issue, but we do also have some very protective lease laws in France. So the leases that we do, you can pass it on to your children by law. So at the same time, if they do want their children to take up the farm afterwards, because they're long-term tenants, they have this very protected lease, the children will have priority to take over the farm that we own. So it's not through ownership, but through our very good lease laws, they do get to ensure this generational transfer if they want to. And again, you know, some of them are farmers who don't come from a family background, farming family background that we lease to, and they can see farming more as a, you know, a thing that they want to do for 20 years, 15, 20 years, but not necessarily, sometimes it's already a second career, etc. So we see that this new generation sometimes has less of the strong attachment to the land that you can see in traditional farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can see that as a new kind of culture here in Ireland as well, you know, but I often do feel, you know, very sorry, I think in many respects for, I suppose, younger farmers who cannot get access to land and feel that it is a career for them, particularly women who want to get involved in farming. You know, unless you are really inherit or handed on a farm at this stage in Ireland, it is so difficult to get access to that land. And I think increasingly here in Ireland, and I suppose, Louise, unless you have another comment or question there, we might I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah, we're about to head on to the hour.
Yeah. So I suppose, Alice, for us, it's such, I'm not saying it's a different way of thinking. There is a lot of differences in what you're saying, I suppose, for tradition here in Ireland. But I also really, really believe that we have many decisions to make in Ireland in relation to access to land and in relation to farming itself, and maybe opening up farming a little bit more than what it has been in the past. And I really think that it is, I suppose, a way of life. It is a future and a career that should be open to people, men and women, if it is something that they want to do. And I think in many respects, access to land prevents that and prevents that career. But most definitely, our idea now via the ruralisation project would be that we would most definitely target the local county councils in relation to this European handbook that has been developed by Alice and her team and her part of the ruralisation project that we in the University of Galway are involved in as well. But on that note, Alice, we always try and finish if we can on the hour, so we get people that log in exactly for the hour. But in relation to that, we've some really positive comments coming through on the chat, and it is such an interesting aspect. So I think on behalf of everybody that has tuned in today, I want to really thank Alice for joining us. Thank her for all of her work in the Access to Land group that they have in France and across Europe, and most definitely for all her work and the way in which she collaborated with us in the ruralisation project. So Alice, thank you very much. To the Department of Rural and Community Development, as always, thank you very much for your support in relation to the Rural Voices seminar series via the University of Galway. And to all of you who joined today and who join us on a regular basis, thank you very, very much. Your support is really greatly welcome. And we hope that in some way we enrich your understanding of rural issues via the Rural Studies Centre seminar series. So have a good evening. Thank you very much. And again, thanks to Alice.
Thank you, Maura. Goodbye.
Bye. See you soon.
You can hang on for 1 second, Alice, if you like, and we'll have a look at the chats if you wanted to hold on to any of the material.
Absolutely. I was thinking.
Maura, do you want to just stop the recording?
Yeah.
Please.
Sorry, no, I'm just